Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon to discuss another aspect of the federal milk marketing orders. I'm Michael Wadig, and I'm the Associate Director of Government Affairs at the Dairy Business Association and Edge Dairy Farmer Cooperative. We've joined up with several organizations in the Upper Midwest to discuss federal order reform, and we're excited to have Dr. Maren Bozic with us to guide us through this complicated process and discussion. I'll turn it over to my colleague now, Lucas Shostrom, to introduce himself.
Thanks, Michael. Lucas Shostrom here, Executive Director at Minnesota Milk Producers Association. And as Michael said, we are also supported by our partners in Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota, as you can see on the screen. And similarity between our 6 organizations, we're all farmer-driven, farmer-funded, along with some associate or corporate sponsorship from other businesses in the agriculture community, and happy to bring Maren to you today. So with no further ado, Dr. Bozic, we'll turn it over to you, and thanks so much for joining us, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience as we work through our technical challenges that always seem to be present whenever we talk about federal orders. It might be the subject, not the technology. I told my 21-month-old baby about make allowances 2 hours ago, and he's still crying. So I hope that the audience reaction at the end of the 60 minutes will be different. But if you do see a baby coming in all in rage, he may have some opinions on how to price protein. So we'll just hear him out for a second. Okay, so today we are going to talk about make allowances, but the topic is broader. We are really talking about how do we price milk? How do we discover proper prices for milk? And it may be worthwhile to just step back and say, well, why is it not as simple as in corn? After all, we don't need large government institutions and many government employees to determine the price of corn. You can call your local county elevator, you can take a look at CME, and you know immediately what the price of corn is. Why is it different with milk? Well, one difference is that with corn, if you don't like the price today, you don't need to sell your corn today. You can let it sit in the silo, and then you check in tomorrow and the day after, and then whenever you feel the price is right, whenever you feel that we would peak, that's where you sell grain. You don't have that luxury with milk. With milk, you have to sell it every day, and if your buyer calls you in the morning and says, well, today we are not going to pick up your milk, or today we're going to pay $5 per hundredweight less, you wouldn't consider that fair. You wouldn't consider that free market. You would consider that an exercise of market power. You would probably end up suing your milk buyer if they were to consistently engage in tactics to extract value from you on the account of the fact that you have to sell your milk every day. So whether it's United States or other parts of the world, different systems have evolved to reduce the frequency of determining milk price and to reduce the friction in contracting between milk producers and milk buyers. The US system is just one of many possible systems for pricing milk, the federal milk marketing order system, I mean. And at the end of today's presentation, I will just throw a hint on how other countries are going about solving some of the same problems that we are solving here. The way we have determined in the United States, the way we do it currently, is that we don't look at the spot price for milk, because the spot price for milk is the price for distressed milk. That's for milk that did not have a home that morning, did not have a home in its regular plant. So the buyers and sellers are trying to coordinate so that the milk is not dumped, and that milk typically sells at a discount to a regular class 3 price or a regular federal order price. So we don't look at spot prices for true value of milk. Instead, what we look at are the freely established prices for bulk commodity products: butter, nonfat dry milk, cheddar cheese, and dry whey. Those 4 are the bulk commodities that we look at to infer what is the fair value of milk. So you can ask, why those 4 commodities? Why not something else more fancy? And here's a little plug for your company, Lucas, the Red Fat Creamery. So like, if somebody says, well, why don't we look at the prices for Lucky Linda cheese? That's a cheddar cheese produced by Elise, Lucas's wife. Why is the price of that cheese not something that we should be using to determine the fair price of milk? Why are we going with the 40-pound blocks or 500-pound barrels to determine the price of milk? Well, because when you buy Lucky Linda, you're buying a story, you're buying the artisanal cheese, you're buying all the love and expertise and everything else that goes into making that. That is no longer a commodity cheese. This is a diversified product. So the share of the market value of Lucky Linda that is fair to attribute to milk is a smaller share than in the commodity cheese market, because in commodity cheese, you don't have a brand, you don't have a story behind it. It's just a bulk commodity product, and the value of that product, according to the federal order system, is mostly due to the milk that goes into that product. That's the central premise that we will follow, and that will take us ultimately to the discussion on make allowances. So we'll start with butter. There is, of course, hand-rolled butter, grass-fed, milk, butter, etc. All the attribute-rich niche products. But then there is, excuse me. But then there is a commodity bulk butter, and it's the commodity bulk butter that goes that is used for price discovery of Butterfat price. And we will see this. I am getting the notification from my organizers that I need to shut off my camera because the audio is cutting out at random times. Rather than shut off my camera, I think what I'll do is I'll call in. We had this problem earlier today, and ultimate problem is that Comcast is a monopoly in this part of the state. That's the ultimate problem, I would say. So competition is always good. So bear with me, I'm going to call in.
Am I being heard? Can someone confirm?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. I'm on audio control. I'm sure the quality is not as good as a Larry King mic, but hopefully you will hear me more clearly this way. So we will start with Butterfat. How do we determine the price of Butterfat? Every one of you, if you're a dairy producer on your milk check, we will notice a line that says Butterfat, how many pounds you ship, what is the price of Butterfat, and how much Butterfat contributes to your milk check. So how is that price of Butterfat determined? We start with a freely established price of butter, and there are no government controls that stipulate minimum price of butter. So as the demand and supply determine, price of butter can be $2.50, it can go down to $1 per pound. So there are no government regulations that stipulate the maximum or the minimum price of butter. It's a free market. What government does do is it sets a system for extracting the information from the market. So once a week, they survey large butter manufacturers. They ask them what is the price of butter that they receive for the butter that is sold that week. They do that for 4 weeks in a row, 4 to 5 weeks. They take a weighted average, and that becomes the official price of butter for a month. In this case, let's say month of May 2021, and that's the price of butter that we will use. So how does it work? We start with a butter price, and then from that butter price, we are going to deduct the cost of processing. So how much does it cost a butter plant to make 1 pound of butter? And that's that magic word, that's the magic phrase, make allowance. Make allowance is your average manufacturing cost of making 1 pound of butter in this case. And ever since 2009, the number that was used as a make allowance for butter is 17 cents and 0.15 of a cent per pound of butter. So when you take away the make allowance from the price of butter, you arrive at the gross value, and then you have to multiply that by the yield. How much butter can you make per pound of Butterfat? Once you do that, you arrive at the Butterfat price. So let me take you through an example using the most recent monthly prices. So these are the actual numbers for May 2021. We'll start with a butter price of $1.81 and 0.07 of a cent. Make allowance, as we said already, is 17 cents and 0.15 of a cent. So the value of Butterfat in 1 pound of butter is the difference between the butter price and the make allowance. That's $1.6392. In other words, what we are assuming here is that the value of butter, market value of butter, is due to the cost of processing, which includes some normal returns to capital and management, etc. And then the rest is the value of Butterfat. Everything that's not the processing cost must be attributed to the value of Butterfat. And so the value of Butterfat in 1 pound of butter is $1.6392. But what we are interested in is the value of 1 pound of Butterfat. So the question then becomes, how much butter can we make from 1 pound of Butterfat? And the assumption is that we can make 1.211 pounds of butter from 1 pound of Butterfat. You do the calculation, you arrive at the value of 1 pound of Butterfat at $198.51. So the kerfuffle, the hearings, the policy debate, the many headlines in the dairy media that you will see over the next year to 2 years, maybe even longer, is what's the appropriate value for this number here? So what is the appropriate processing cost that we should be using in this formula? As if you use a different number, if you use a higher number, if you use, instead of 17, 15, if you go to 19 cents or 20 cents or something like that, that will reduce the Butterfat price. And likewise, if you use a lower number, if the make allowances are lower, then the Butterfat price will rise. I think it's safe to assume that if we do have a hearing, and based on the testimony submitted to the hearing, that the make allowances will likely be increased, not reduced, which means that one of the immediate effects would be that the Butterfat price would be lower. And that's where the strife begins, because dairy producers look at that and say, well, is this really necessary? Why would we willingly agree to lower our milk price? What are the long-term consequences if we don't do that? And that's what we will be discussing today. But before we go into policy debate, I first want to take you through the numerics, through the calculations. Some of this may be too intense or too dense to grasp everything in 40 minutes, but we are recording this webinar, and I've designed these slides to serve as a reference material for you so that you can go back to these slides and if you do wish to get educated on the precise calculations so that you can do that. So that's the Butterfat price. And we use exactly the same concept, exactly the same protocol for dry whey and for non-fat dry milk. So for dry whey, we observe the monthly price, we deduct the make allowance, we assume that you can make 1.03 pounds of dry whey from a pound of other solids being whey proteins, lactose, minerals, anything other than casein in skim milk. In skim solids. So from those calculations, we can arrive at the current value of other solids. In the same way for non-fat dry milk, where the monthly price for May was $1.23 and 92 hundredths of a cent. There is a make allowance, or the average cost of processing to make 1 pound of non-fat dry milk. There's a manufacturing yield there as well, and then you get the value of non-fat solids. So all of these numbers are subject to revision. All of these numbers, all of these make allowances will be subject to the hearing and the testimony. And as many of you know, Dr. Mark Stevenson, my good friend at University of Wisconsin, is working on a study. My understanding is that he is about to submit his final results to USDA with the survey. So he conducted a large survey of many plants in the United States that make these basic commodities, and then he asked them to submit to him voluntarily how much milk they received in the plant, how much product they've made, and what were the costs. And then he allocated those costs to various product lines. and he will report to USDA what is the distribution of average processing cost per pound of product across these four categories. What is important to notice or to remark is that even though we use a single number for make allowance, not all plants have the same processing cost. If you have a smaller, older plant that has maybe been around for 20 years or more, the technology that plant uses will be different than a large new plant that has just been commissioned. And the processing costs will, of course, be different as well. Typically, newer plants have lower processing costs and older plants have a higher processing cost per pound of product. So one of the key decisions that USDA will have to make once we go to a hearing and once they present the survey results to public and then hear testimonies from various industry participants is which number to choose. Because the survey will reveal that there is a large range of numbers. Just like dairy producers have cost of processing ranging probably from $14 per hundredweight all the way to $23, $24 per hundredweight of milk. Different producers, different systems, different efficiency levels. The same is true with plants. And typically, or I should say typically, in previous hearings, what USDA would do is they would go with a number such that 80% of the plants have processing costs lower than that number, and 20% of the plants have cost of processing higher than that number. So they will need to choose some line. It's not going to be average. It's probably going to be a little bit higher than the average. My guess is that what's going to be different this time around from previous rounds is that the size of the plant surveyed is it's a much bigger range from the smaller to the higher than it was 15 years ago when Dr. Stevenson last did the survey. So then the question becomes, how do we appropriately set the make allowance where most of the new large plants have a lower processing cost and most of the smaller, older plants have a higher cost of processing? And it's not an easy issue. USDA will have to make some reasoned decision that they will have to defend in their tentative decision that they will publish, and then there'll be comments on that. I want to spend some amount of time going through the calculations for cheese, and there are two reasons for that. First, because I think you should hear that at least once, given that your milk check is driven by these calculations, both directly and indirectly. And then also to drive the point home is that if we are going to talk about make allowances, it is disingenuous to try to align them with true value if at the same time we do not examine all the technology parameters that are also driving this conversion from a commodity price all the way to the component price. So where are the technology parameters? You've seen some of them already. We are assuming how much butter we can make from a pound of butterfat. We are assuming how much dry weight we can make from a pound of other solids. And we are going to make some assumptions on the amount of cheese we can make from a pound of protein and pound of fat. And those assumptions may not be correct. In fact, one can argue that over years, the cheese plant efficiency has increased, and that has been partially compensating for the make allowances that have been downward biased since 2009, or at least last 5 or 6 years. So let's talk about cheese a little bit. What is different with cheese than all other three commodities, butter, dry whey, and non-fat dry milk, is that in all other three of them, there is a single component that's driving the show. Non-fat solids to non-fat dry milk, butterfat to butter. Well, cheese is not a one-team band or one-man band. Cheese is a matrix. I am seeing the notification that the network connection is slow. DB18, can you confirm you still hear me?
I can hear you, Marin, but you are frozen.
Okay, frozen cheese. All right, I see that the screen is back.
Yeah, it's better now.
All right, we're back in the game. So cheese is a matrix. Cheese is a matrix of protein and fat. So if we take the market value of cheese, we need to figure out how to apportion the value of cheese to fat and protein. And that's why the formulas are slightly more complex. We are going to start with the same approach that we've taken with Butterfat. So we are going to take the cheese price, deduct make allowance, multiply by the yield, and then get something that we will provisionally call gross value of protein in cheese. So what does this measure? Imagine a large cheese vat, and then you add a pound of protein to that cheese vat. How much more cheese can you make? The formula assumes that you can make 1.383 pounds of cheese more for every pound of protein that you add. And that's because more butter can be used, butterfat can be utilized, because there's some moisture in cheese, etc. So that's why you can make more than 1 pound of cheese per pound of protein that you add. So if you use the technology parameters in the cheese formula, and if you use May 2021 prices of 182.06 for cheese, you arrive at the gross value of protein in cheese at $2.24 at 0.08 of a cent. How do we get there again? 182, that's the cheese price, minus the make allowance, that's here. Then you take that difference and you multiply the difference by the yield, and you arrive at the protein value in cheese. So if we have a make allowance hearing, then this 20.03 may become something different, may become 23 cents, 24 cents, etc. Some people say that we should probably be in the 23 to 25 cents range. And I have no data to corroborate it one way or another, so I will not speculate, though I just did, I guess. So that's the gross value of protein in cheese. But we also have to take into consideration that butterfat may be more or less valuable in cheese than it is in butter. So we have to adjust that. So we calculated the protein value in cheese, but we have to adjust that protein value in cheese either up or down based on the relative value of butterfat in cheese versus butter. And that's that butterfat adjustment that we will cover now. So we will start by calculating the butterfat value in cheese. It goes the same way as all other calculations we've done so far. So what we are asking is, how much more cheese can we make if we add a pound of butterfat to a large cheese vat? And the assumption is, according to formulas, that you can make 1.572 pounds of cheese more. And this comes from Van Slyke formula, and about 10 other parameters go into this one number, and each of those 10 parameters are subject to dispute, if you will, because they're based on technological parameters from 21 years ago at this point. But the value of butterfat in cheese, according to this, is 254.71 in May 2021. At the same time, if that same amount of butterfat was put in butter rather than cheese, the value would be 198.51. In other words, butter is currently lower valued product than cheese if you're looking where to put your cream in order to add value to that cream. So because butterfat is more valuable in cheese than in butter, we're going to lift the protein price higher. And we start by calculating the value of butterfat in butter. That's 178.66. And then, so we calculated this part now. And then we look at the value added to butterfat per pound of protein. So that's why we need that last element. And so you arrive at the butterfat adjustment of just short of 89 cents. So that's this 0.8898, this is the additional value of butterfat that was created by using that butterfat in cheese rather than in butter. So we'll take that entire value and say, okay, that value would not exist if it weren't for protein, if it weren't for cheese. So we'll take that entire extra value of butterfat created by making cheese, and we'll slap that on top of gross value of protein in cheese, and that's what we're going to call protein price. So we'll take the marginal value of protein in cheese of 224.08. We'll add the butterfat adjustment, and we'll arrive at a federal marketing order protein price of $3.1307. Okay, so why did I take you through this very involved numerical exercise? First, because I think you do need to see it once. Maybe you don't need to see it twice in your life, but you do need to see it once because your livelihood depends on it. But beyond that, when we talk about the make allowances, we're talking about just one number in this long calculation protocol. And a proper adjustment to reflect changes in our industry between 2009 and today would be an adjustment that takes into consideration all of these technological parameters. So how much cheese can we really make from extra pound of protein? Maybe our cheese vats are more efficient these days. How much more cheese can we make if we add a pound of butterfat in the cheese vat? Maybe that's where the efficiencies happened as well. So these two parameters are in question. How much butterfat really remains in cheese? The formula assumes that 10% of butterfat is lost and then recaptured and sold as cream at the same value as a regular cream, even though it went through a cheese vat, which is an unrealistic assumption. And then what is the butterfat to protein ratio in cheese as well? And then so each of these parameters, and by the way, the yield 1.383 and 1.572, they have about 10 parameters that modify Van Slyke's formula behind them. I dare not go there even on this call today, but I'm happy to share an Excel spreadsheet with you if you really want to geek out on that. My main point is that it is disingenuous to talk about make allowances unless if we are talking about the technological parameters at the same time. If we want to have a formula that is a true formula that reflects the true contribution of butterfat and protein to cheese, and that is fair to processors as well as producers, then it's not sufficient to just talk about processing costs that have gone up, but ignore all the technological improvements that happened over the last 20 years that modified these parameters that are also part of the formula. So my hope is, I'm all for adjusting the formula. If we are going to have a system, we should have a system. If we don't like the system, we should just discard the system and have something else. Having a system but then neglected, having a system that is left to rot because for our short-term interests dare not touch into it, that's not a recipe for competitive, growing, vibrant dairy industry. We should either do a proper upkeep of these formulas across all of the parameters, or just go with something completely different. Not do a partial fix on just make allowances or just technological parameters or something like that. So I want to take you a little bit through the impact on Class 3 and Class 4 prices, and then discuss who may have what kind of incentives as we get into these hearings. What is a Class 3 price? Class 3 price is nothing else than an index. It's an artificially constructed price that has some very attractive features. And the attractive features are the following. It tracks how dairy producers get paid, and it tracks how dairy processors pay for milk. So because of that, dairy producers can use risk management derivatives built around Class 3 price to effectively stabilize their milk revenue, and dairy processors can do the same to stabilize their input costs. And you need both buyers and sellers in any derivative market in order to make a market clearing price. So indexes that are based on market value of products, butter, cheese, dry whey, that go into the Class 3 price are intrinsically attractive because they create a sell-side interest on the producer side and a buy-side interest on the processor side. Or you can say sell-side interest on the processor side for commodities. But the Class 3 price can be further boiled down to, this is a standard way to present it. It's 3.5 pounds of butterfat, 2.9915 pounds of protein, and 5.6935 pounds of other solids per pound, per 100 weight of class 3 milk. And then you plug in the butterfat, protein, and other solids formula. So how would a change in make allowance affect the class 3 price? It would affect it through the value of components. It would modify the butterfat price, it would modify the protein price, and it would modify the other solid price. These parameters here, at least, they don't need to be changed. We can discuss whether they should be changed, but they don't need to be changed with a make allowance here. This can also be rewritten just by plugging in the formula and arriving to a reduced form. You can represent the class 3 price as a linear function of butter, cheese, dry whey, and then a constant. These parameters, all of these parameters, would potentially change if we start changing the technology parameters and make allowances. So right now, 10 cents decrease in butter price leads to a 4 cents decrease in class 3 price. So class 3 price is not very sensitive to changes in butter prices. At the same time, 10 cents decrease in cheese price reduces the class 3 price by 96 cents. So the class 3 price is much more sensitive to cheese prices than to butter prices. And the dry whey is somewhere in between. So what make allowance changes would do is they would change this constant here. So if make allowances go up, then this constant would go down. That's what would happen. So the same thing for class 4. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that in class 4, 10 cents decrease in butter price leads to 42 cents decrease in class 4 price. So you could ask, how come that class 4 is so much more sensitive to butterfat prices and to butter prices than class 3 if both class 4 and class 3 have 3.5 pounds of butterfat per 100 pounds of milk? And the reason is to be found in the protein formula. When you look at what's happening behind the scene, when butterfat prices increase, when butter price increases, it increases the butterfat price. But if the cheese price stays the same, then the protein price goes down. Remember, you have a pound of cheese. That pound of cheese derived its value from butterfat and from protein. And if the value of butterfat is suddenly higher because butter price went up, and the value of cheese didn't change, well, it must be the case that the protein is now less valuable. And so that countervailing effect of butterfat up, protein down, is when you combine those two effects, you arrive at that very meager effect that changes in butter prices have on class 3. But there is no such effect on the class 4 side because there is no protein price in the class 4. So that's why class 4 reacts to butter much more vigorously than class 3. So a lot of algebra, but let's talk about considerations with fixing the make allowances, with increasing make allowances. So there are short-term impacts and long-term impacts. And if you recall that movie, Jerry Maguire with Tom Cruise, there's that scene with Cuba Gooding Jr. and Tom Cruise when he makes Tom Cruise yell, "Show me the money." Well, we could say the same here. Follow the money. If you want to understand who is going to be in favor of changing make allowances and who is going to be against it, just follow the money. And today I will try to boil down the short-term cash flow impacts that changes make allowances will have on different types of cooperatives, private processors, etc. And then once this hearing starts, you will hear all kinds of reasons. They will all seem reasonable. They will all seem anchored in fair and balanced reasoning. But at the end of the day, those arguments are all chosen because they have certain cash flow implications for the company stating those reasons. So I'm a pretty down-to-earth person in that sense. I believe in human nobility, but I even more believe in human self-interest. As an economist, that's I guess how my training was. So let's see who has something to win or lose if make allowances are fixed to their true value. And by the way, just to be completely clear, my personal opinion is that make allowances do need to be fixed. but I also believe that the technology parameters also need to be fixed if we are going to stay with that system that we have right now of component-based pricing. So either do it all of it or just forget about it. Don't just cherry pick one piece that benefits you while saying that everything else is too complex to change. So if you're going to deal with it, let's fix it all. So let's take a look at who has more to lose and who has more to gain from increasing make allowances. Think about cooperatives as well as private processors who own manufacturing facilities. They actually have to incur costs of making a product. There's no way around it. We cannot administratively reduce the actual cost of making a product. If you want to make cheese, it's going to cost you some amount of money to make the cheese. No matter what make allowances say, that's going to cost you money to make cheese. And if you sell that cheese and the make allowances are smaller than your true processing cost, then you have really two choices. You're either going to, if you're a co-op, you're going to put some sort of deduction on the milk check, and different co-ops try to hide it in different ways because ultimately it's unpleasant for management to say that, well, look, guys, our costs of processing are higher, so that's why we need to deduct. So they go around it. They either reduce the protein price or they put it in PPD or some other ways. But the bottom line is they're not being nefarious in any way. If they had more money, they would return it to dairy producers that own those co-ops. But if their costs of processing are higher than make allowances, something has to give, and milk check is going to give. So don't think if you're with a manufacturing co-op, don't think that you can somehow be isolated just by artificially keeping if you're a dairy producer, don't think that you can be isolated if you just artificially keep make allowances low. You can't. Make allowances or some other way, dairy cooperative will need to pass the cost of manufacturing to dairy producers. The alternative is, of course, to make value-added products. Maybe the cheddar cheese does not generate enough value to cover make allowances, to leave money, sufficient profits if the class 3 price has to be paid based on downward bias make allowances. So maybe we need to make some value-added cheeses. Maybe we need to make some kind of cheese that is not quite commodity, but it's charged at a premium. It's priced at a premium because buyers consider it somehow better. And we've seen some of that happen as well. Think about private processors. Now, private processors very frequently don't have direct negotiations with producers. They buy milk from a cooperative. So those private processors would love to see make allowances increased, because if their contract with the cooperative to buy some milk stipulates that they will pay class 3 plus, let's say, 25 cents, or some class 3 minus 50 cents, or anything like that's plus minus, but based on an index. If that index goes down, as it would go down if make allowances increase, it would benefit those private processors. So we will hear a lot of arguments that their cost of processing have gone up over the last 10 years, and indeed they have, but that will be the side of the story that they will emphasize in pushing for the make allowance hearing, because it benefits them. If you're a bargaining co-op, now it gets really interesting. Think about co-ops that maybe make some of the milk into products in plants they own, but then also sell most of the milk to private. If you're such a cooperative, now you have an interesting dilemma. If make allowances are increased, then on the plants you own, you can more closely align your true cost of processing with make allowances, so you don't have to take as large deductions on the milk check. But on all the contracts that you have with privates to sell them milk, you are concerned that increasing make allowances may, in fact, reduce your income. So why am I mentioning this? Because if you look at, I'm not going to name any names today on this webinar, but if you look at nationally, who is mostly manufacturing co-op and who is more bargaining co-op, like where most of the milk is sold to others, and if you look at more recent trends of how cheese plants are built and who provides the milk, it is not clear that all of the cooperatives and all of the major cooperatives in the country will rushed to this hearing with great enthusiasm to have the make allowances aligned with the true processing cost. That may lead to different outcomes. Ultimately, privates do not vote in the hearing or in the referendum after the hearing. But what may still take us to that point where the decision is based on principles rather than short-term cash flows is that AMS has one very powerful tool in their toolbox. If AMS, if USDA, dairy programs, if they come back with a recommended decision to increase make allowances based on the record submitted at the hearing, and if some larger co-ops don't like that decision, what are they going to do? If they vote against the decision, they don't vote for status quo, they vote to disband the orders altogether. So that's why this is a little bit like a filibuster in the Senate, if you will. The hardest part is to initiate the debate. Once we initiate the debate, then the principles will guide it from that point on. I guess that part is different in the Senate. But filibuster is typically not done once the debate is on the bill has been going on for a while. They try to kill the bill before the debate even starts. And I'm not saying that anybody's trying to kill this debate here, but at least some of the emphasis put on Class 1 hearing over the last few months could perhaps be rationalized by the desire to focus on a different topic and not on make allowances. And then let's talk about the areas of the country where most milk goes to fluid milk. Fluid milk, Class 1 milk, is based on Class 3 and 4 prices. Advanced prices, skim prices, etc. There's some nitty-gritty details there. But at the end of the day, the only thing that federal auditors really do is they set or really regulate. They regulate the relative price of fluid milk to manufacturing milk. Relative price, not the absolute level, but just the relative price. And if we increase make allowances, then the Class 3 and 4 prices go down, which means that the Class 1 price goes down. And in the areas of the country where most milk goes to manufacturing co-ops, you could say, well, there might be some rebalancing on the milk check in a sense that the Class 3 price may be lower, but the co-op-specific deductions may not be as onerous. So at the end of the day, it's not quite clear whether dairy producers' milk price would even be decreased. Even with bargaining co-ops in manufacturing areas, you could say, well, maybe they'll find a way to negotiate with privates so that the make allowances have some fair impact on the total milk revenue or revenue received for milk delivered. Essentially, it's not quite clear that there'll be a full pass-through to privates or the bargaining co-op. But in the Class 1 areas, there's no way out. Like once you increase the make allowances, the Class 1 price will go down. And one could even say that without federal orders, we would be seeing a much lower fluid price in those areas or everywhere in the country, so that the federal orders really do put a hard floor on the wholesale price of milk going to bottling, and therefore changes in make allowances would reduce that price. So I do not anticipate that we will see strong supporters of make allowance hearing among those that are in the area with heavy fluid milk presence. What are the long-term impacts? Long-term impacts is that if we are going to have this system, well, we better keep Class 3 and 4 as meaningful price indexes, because if we pay complete, if we disregard them, if we don't maintain them, if we don't update the make allowances, if we don't update technological parameters, etc., at some point they may be so divorced from reality that maybe they will even stop being used as basis for contracting. And that would be bad, because we have very robust risk management with a stem cell in Chicago, with a stem, in Chicago, with a spine in Chicago, the CME, but then also leaves the LGM, the DRP, etc. And that entire system could potentially be jeopardized even if over the extended period of time we do not properly maintain the indexes, and then those indexes are just seen as increasingly irrelevant for everything. But however, there is another long-term impact as well. If your make allowances really truly are well aligned with cost of production, then it does favor more commoditized production. When you know that there is that your profit margin is not insulated from market signals through a make allowance process, then you may be more keen to explore value-added cheeses or move into some direction away from just plain old cheddar. But if make allowances truly reflect cost of production, then if you're a cheesemaker, you can just put in a new plant and in the, at least in ideal world, have your profit margin secured. So why would you risk money to build something that can give you a little bit more value, but a lot more risk, when you can make just cheddar or just dry whey or just nonfat dry milk and have your profit margin secured? So that's a problem that is not problem specific to make allowances. That's a problem overall with the federal orders, that they change the risk-reward ratio for making value-added products versus commoditized products. And when you look, for example, at the value of U.S. exports per pound, weighted average across all product categories, we are about 50, 60 cents per pound of product lower than Europe or New Zealand, because they do put more emphasis on value-added products. But that's, again, not a problem specific with make allowances, and it's hard to solve that problem just by ignoring make allowances. But something to also take into consideration if you do change make allowances. We talked a lot about butterfat price, protein price. We talked about these rather involved formulas for arriving at the fair value of butterfat and protein. I thought it might be a good flavor for the end of this call to just throw a few hints of how it's done elsewhere. So here's Ireland. Ireland has something that they call A plus B minus C system. So every cooperative, these are all cooperatives in Ireland, every cooperative is free to determine whatever they're going to pay for fat and protein per kilogram of fat and protein. It's the same as pound. They just use the European system for both the currency and the weight. And you can, so the Butterfat here in column B, you can see that prices vary. They vary quite a bit from one co-op to the next. And that is determined by their product mix, by their competitive position. And the freedom they have to set those prices is balanced with the transparency in these prices get published. You can actually see publicly how much each co-op is paying. And here in the US, well, you know, I guess I would get quite a few enemies if I start publishing those prices publicly myself. So there's this trade-off between transparency and freedom to set those formulas. So I'm sure that every one of the co-ops internally has some way to convert the value of the product they're making to the value of components, but they're not obligated to publish that. There's no public hearing on the proper formula. Rather, what we are relying on is competition for milk to set the price for butterfat and for protein as high as the market will bear. And I think the lesson for us here in the US is that we can tinker with formulas until the cows come home, but unless there is competition for farm milk, farmer is always going to lose out, no matter whether they own the processing capacity where that milk is going, or the company where the milk is going, or if they sell to privates. Competition is the best cure against laziness, inefficiencies, outdated thinking, rigidities of various kinds. Competition forces you to be better more than anything else, and that's true in all walks of life. You know, when you're single and you're trying to find a mate to get married, you exercise and you put your hair back and you shave and you do all of that things because there's competition for good meat. Like when you run a dairy farm, you need to be efficient and have the best cows and low somatic cells, because as much as your peers in the county and elsewhere are your friends and you have common interests and you have to come together to fight for common cause, they also are your competition. And if you're inefficient relative to them, you lose out. You'll have to leave the sector. In the same way, when there is no competition for milk, you will see low milk prices no matter how you twist and turn, and no matter how many make allowances or technological parameters you put in, no matter how long the formula goes. Nothing helps dairy farmer better than robust competition for their milk. So then the question must become, how do we get robust competition for milk? Not to say that we should discard federal orders. No, I'm not suggesting that at all. Not on this call, at least. Or I'm not driving the discussion in that direction. I'm just saying that the system for determining fair and balanced price for components is void of any meaning unless we have robust competition for milk. Other than for class one. In class one, it really does set the tone, because whether you're a small milk buyer or Walmart, you have to pay that class one price, and there's no way that all your billions of dollars in equity can help you against even a single farmer if you want to direct contract with them. You have to pay the class one price. So that's a true protection for farmers there. But in all other manufacturing milk classes, ultimately it's competition that drives the price. So that's an island. I want to give you a little bit of flavor from Spain. In Spain, they recently introduced a number of indices, and I wish I had an image here rather than just a lot of text. But basically what they do is they allow processors at the beginning of the year to send out the offers to the milk producers that they would like to work with and say, what is your base price? Here's your base price for January. And then different buyers will offer different pay prices for January, and milk producers can offer where to go. And there is nothing in the legislation that stipulates how high or how low that January price has to be. But then from January to February, from February to March, those month-to-month changes, they are regulated by the milk pricing regulation based on an index. And that index takes into account 6 different factors: farm gate prices in surrounding countries, product prices in European Union, Butterfat prices in European Union. But then it gets interesting. They also take into account the cost of production, livestock feed costs in Spain, and then also the producer price index. So think about the cost of machinery and everything else in Spain. So they have an index that would automatically start lifting milk prices higher as the conditions for making milk deteriorate in terms of cost of production or the input cost for making milk. But that is married with a competition for milk. Competition sets that initial price. So it's really just the variation through the year that is based on the automated factors to reduce the friction, to reduce the frequency of renegotiating a contract. But the competition drives the overall annual average through the January price. And then you have a very interesting case of Australia. And this is a very new experiment. It's not yet clear that it will succeed, but there's a new company in Australia that has built an exchange for milk where dairy producers and dairy buyers can submit bids and offers, and then for extended period of time, that becomes the milk price. So it's very difficult actually to organize something like that, and I wonder whether these guys will succeed. But the reason I'm listing all of these things here is because as much as we need to understand the nitty-gritties about make allowances and manufacturing yields and the hearing process and what's fair and balanced, we should always keep an open mind to, is this really the best system? Are there better systems out there that are as fair and balanced to dairy producers and may result in more robust exports, in more robust competition for milk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not here to give answers to those questions, not today. Today, I just wanted to put a bee in your bonnet so that you don't think that the entire world revolves just about 2003 for cheese and the manufacturing yield for butter and those few ultimately artificial numbers chosen to represent those formulas. We are at 2 minutes to 1. I hope that the sound was solid enough that you were able to grasp what I was saying. And I'm returning the mic back to DBA team and Lucas and see if there are any questions that I can answer.
Yeah, you sounded good, Dr. Bozic. Thank you very much. We do have one question, but feel free to send other questions in. And the first question is, and this was asked much earlier in the presentation, about a half hour ago, why are dairy farmers the only side of this discussion being asked to lower their cost of production? And it's a complicated answer to a somewhat simple question, but would you like to go into that?
Why are dairy farmers being asked to lower their cost of production?
Yeah, I think with reference to why do processors get a make allowance, but dairy farmers have to continue lowering their cost of production, I think is the reference when it came across. And Mr.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so nobody's really, I guess the social contract, so think about what's happening with beef right now. There's a limited processing capacity. So the packers are increasing the box beef prices, the prices that go into retail, but they're not passing those returns to dairy producers, to beef producers. And now there's a hearing. Actually, there was a hearing yesterday in the Senate around that, because the spread between retail and farm gate is increasing, and that's considered not fair. So the social contract here is that processors get a more stable profit margin, but in return, they have to pass the entire commodity value of milk back to dairy producers. So that the equivalent would be in beef if there was some sort of a commodity box beef set of products, some primal cuts, and then we would be measuring the cost of converting, the cost of slaughtering and cutting the animals into those primal cuts, and that would be the make allowance, and then whether there is more processing capacity or not, the packers would have to pass a certain value back to beef producers. They don't have anything like that. So that's why that spread keeps on growing there. Here in dairy, under federal orders, the social contract is different. Dairy processors get a more stable profit margin, unlike dairy producers, but in return, they have to pass most of the value of commodity value of products down to producers, even if the increase in wholesale price of products is driven solely by demand. Of course, the system starts breaking down at those precise moments, because then cheesemakers depool, etc. Nothing is foolproof, but at least that's the idea. The idea is that processors get a more stable profit margin, but they have to return a larger share of that wholesale dollar back to producers.
Yeah, and we have no other questions at this time. I guess one question I get asked occasionally from producers, but not processors. Processors tell me they fight for milk. Producers, especially in some areas of the country, talk about how there isn't competition for milk, but you talked often about competition and with all these formulas and all the classifications, and especially comparing to other commodities, and you referenced corn much earlier. How much does competition raise and lower the price of milk versus the formulas get in the way of allowing that to happen, maybe, or the advanced prices and those sorts of things?
Well, so the question is, do these federal order systems lead to lower competition? They may, though I don't have an evidence that would be admissible in court beyond a reasonable doubt. But here's the way it could work. Here's how the formulas may lead to lower number of buyers. If you have a set make allowance and you're a processor, what you're trying to do is you're trying to beat the make allowance by being cheaper than the make allowance. How do you beat the make allowance? By being bigger. So instead of having a 3 million pound milk intake a day, you go to 5 or to 7 or to 9. You build a really large plant so that your make allowance, so that your true processing costs are lower than the make allowances. And then when you have larger plants, there'll be smaller number of plants in any given area, and then you have less buyers, and then you have less competition for milk. So that could be one way that the federal orders lead to less competition. If there were no make allowances, then perhaps processors would be there will be no favorable treatment of low value-added commodities, as opposed to, in a sense, that your profit margin is more secure. So there will be more incentives to go into value add, smaller batches, more buyers, and then milk would essentially be short. So people would be bidding for milk in that sense. But don't take this as gospel. These are some conjectures that may or may not pan out. We are also different than the rest of the world in that we have areas of the country that are less populated and are well suited for large animal systems, and then that means that you can quickly build up 100,000 cows more in a certain area. That makes it attractive to put in a large plant there, and then 3 years before you even put a plant there, call 80 producers and say, would you build a dairy if we build a plant? And then it's a coordinated growth between the plants and producers. You just don't have that in New Zealand or Europe. It's very hard to have that in those countries where you have typically smaller producers and smaller plants. So there are some peculiarities of US that happen just because we are such a big country and we have so much land that we could put both the dairies and the plants on.
Well, there's still no other questions, so I'll ask one more and we can sign off if no others come in. Final question from me is, at this point, you mentioned earlier we're waiting for the study to come out on make allowances. After that study comes out, do you expect at some point in the next 12 months we almost need to have a hearing as a result of that study or other issues? And need, of course, is a very relative term depending on who you are. Is it almost inevitable, I guess, due to that study and the other issues you've raised and from what you know and can share in the industry?
I think that ultimately USDA has the mandate and the responsibility to maintain the system that they're governing. So if there are legitimate calls for the hearing from those that believe they will benefit by increasing make allowances, I think that AMS cannot ignore those calls. Those are legitimate calls. There will be data available showing that the cost of processing have indeed gone up over the last 10 years, or at least we are all under assumption that that's what the study will say. So once that comes out, I think that proponents of the hearing will have an upper hand, and I think, what do you think about protein pricing? Were you just eating lunch? So my son just walked in. Here you go. This is Alexander. He just started eating cheese. He is very new to the cheese world and milk. Yeah, okay, honey. Let Dada finish the webinar. Okay, let Dada. She's also a little bit of a show off, so now he'll dance and smile in the back. So, if this reminds you of a CNN, like that's the clip. This might be a good point to stop, Lucas, given the situation behind.
Yeah, I think that's our cue. I think there is one more question from Trent. We'll follow up with that afterwards, but I think that was our cue that we've talked enough about make allowances for a day. So thank you so much, Dr. Bozic. Thanks to EDGE, DBA, Nebraska State Dairy Association, South Dakota Dairy Producers, and the Iowa State Dairy Association, along with me from Minnesota Milk for partnering on this, and you, Dr. Bozic, for your content. Have a great rest of the day and weekend, and we sure do appreciate the extra entertainment. Thank you, Marn.
Thank you all.